Hold on a second. Did they get cleaned up? Do we have extra copies of Mishnah 9?
I do have one.
Okay, because we had like 10 copies last week. Where'd they all go?
Where'd they go?
Because I've got my copy.
Right now we have
That's Bava Kamma 8. None over there, none over there. Someone cleaned up for us. Okay. How nice of them. Yes. All right, we're making to share. But maybe you have one. What's this one? Oh, that's Torah.
Oh, he's got, I can share it with
Oh, they have a book too.
Are you okay to share?
here, because I'll share it with him. I'll share it with him.
After your comment,
Forgiveness is important.
oh,
Yeah.
we are not stealing the
Rule.
rule. We are not stealing the rule. We can take them another month.
Every day. Elul, we just get more serious about it. All right, so getting serious now that we've got at least a copy. I know we made like 12 copies last week, but everybody just took them home for their friends. So we have to pick up with the concept of theft, of stealing. So we talked about this a little bit last time, but we're going to deal with a special case that the Torah talks about, and the citation is in the handout, Leviticus 5:20-26. This is a case which would often happen, which is where you think somebody has stolen something, have no proof. If I think that Michelle has stolen my phone, it's in my pocket, don't worry, right? And I say, I know you took my phone. And she says, and I say, all right, well, swear to me by God that you didn't take my phone. That was considered the end of the argument, right? She would swear, I didn't take your phone, by God, da, 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 I didn't take your phone. And I would have to accept that, right? Because if there's no witnesses, there's no evidence, there's no way to connect her with the theft. As long as she swears, she's clear.
That's a work in a society of believers. If you are a more secular society, you have a problem.
Well, yes. So remember, we've talked before about having to have a group of people that share this belief and are willing to take their word on it. It's not such a stretch, however, because even in a society where people don't all necessarily believe or believe with the same intensity, if people at least believe that telling the truth is important for the society, you can still get by. So for example, in American courts, we still have people swear, we still have people testify under oath, and we consider that to be helpful. We do, otherwise we wouldn't bother with it. When people will want to give an answer, they'll often say, well, wait a minute, is this under oath? Right? And when someone says you're under oath, they'll often be more serious, or they'll say, I can't answer because they're under oath. They don't want to answer, take the Fifth Amendment, etc. Right? So being under oath still matters in the modern society, even though we don't all share exactly the same belief system, because societies that give up on truth, give up. And then it's like just crash and burn. There has to be at least a shared feeling that truth is better than lies. And that on the whole, when someone tells you they're telling the truth and they mean it seriously, whether it's by the framing of oaths that we have, or whether it's some other form, you know, hand on Bible, hand up in the air, whatever it might be, cross my heart, hope to die, stick a needle in my eye. When the person goes to an additional length to show you that they mean it when they're telling the truth, or they mean it when they say they're telling the truth, we tend to give that more weight. And then the Torah agrees, or rather the Torah began with that idea, and maybe we agree with the Torah. But what happens when it turns out they were lying? All of us, we know that if someone tells you something under oath and it turns out they were lying, that is different than if someone tells you something and it turns out they were lying, but they weren't under an oath.
So it's not punishment from heaven.
So let's find out what the Mishnah says. Okay, so that's the preamble, right? That's the lead up to it. And let's see what we got. All right?
Yes.
So we're down at Mishnah 5.
5.1.
Right.
If a man robbed his fellow.
Oh.
No?
Sorry, I got ahead of ourselves.
Oh.
Yeah, so I was actually, everything I was doing was on Mishnah 7.
Oh.
It's okay. We'll get there eventually. We'll get there eventually.
So.
Yeah.
If a man robbed his fellow of the value of a peruta and swore falsely to him, he must take it to him even as far as Medea.
All right, Medea. All right, so actually there is a little bit of what I was saying that's important here. The lying part's going to come more later, but I should point out the part I was going to get to, but then I got my Mishnah confused, is if you make that oath that I didn't touch your phone, and then it turns out two witnesses show up and say, well, actually, we were hiding behind the tree, we saw you take the phone, and we saw you swear that you didn't take the phone, not only do you have to return the phone, but you have to return the phone plus a 1/5 of the value penalty. Right? So that is the penalty for having sworn falsely. If you take something and are just caught with it, you admit it, and they say, did you take my phone? Yes, I took your phone. You give back the value that was taken, you're square, you're fine.
Right.
But if you swear that you didn't, and then you're caught, there's a penalty that goes to the victim of 1/5 the value of the object that was taken. And this is a penalty that is there both to deter people from swearing falsely, but also to help us understand that a person wouldn't swear falsely if they weren't being honest. If they weren't, the person wouldn't choose to swear falsely casually because they know the penalty for swearing falsely and being caught is much worse than the penalty for just being caught and giving back the item.
What if the item is broken?
You have to give back the value of the item plus the 1/5 penalty. Exactly. And same thing if you've changed the item, right? Or you've eaten the item. People stealing food, I mean, that was not unusual for reasons for stealing. Okay.
What does it mean he has to take it to him as far as?
Okay, so first of all, what's a pruta? A pruta is the smallest value of coin that was used in the ancient world. It's basically like saying it's worth something, a penny. Right? A penny is the usual translation into modern English. It's basically not worthless. So if I steal a candy wrapper from you, that's not really considered to be something of value, even if I stole it from you. And therefore, although I shouldn't have stolen it from you, the court can't force me to give it back and pay a penalty, blah, 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 blah. But as soon as you steal something of even the least valuable level that you can imagine, like a cent, then you are obligated to return it, even if it means traveling all the way to Persia, which is what Medea is talking about. Right? So if you steal a penny from somebody who's like, let's say, a merchant, and he goes back to Persia, and you go, I swore that I hadn't taken it from him, but now I've been caught, or I admit my guilt afterwards, one way or the other, I've got to go take it back to him because I have to return the thing to him. And that means I'm going to take a $1,000 trip to give the man back his penny.
Send it FedEx.
Send it FedEx.
FedEx, yeah.
Read part 2.
He may not give it to his son or to his agent.
There's FedEx for you.
But he may give it to the agent of the court.
Why would we trust the agent of the court more than FedEx? Exactly. I mean, what if I give it to FedEx? I'm telling you I gave it to FedEx? Oh, honest, the check was in the mail, right? No. You give the cash to the court. The court can then send it to the person. That's okay. But just saying I sent it, that doesn't cut any mustard, right? You got to actually make sure you take it, or an appointed person by the court is taking care of it, because you are not allowed to hold on to it. And this is a really important concept in Jewish law. Let's imagine I steal a dollar bill from you, and you go off to Persia, and I've got the dollar bill in my pocket. I can't send you by wire transfer $1's worth of value that you can then cash in the Western Union in Persia. I have to give you back the dollar that I took if it is still in my possession. If it's no longer in my possession, then yes, I can give you value rather than the item. But as long as I have the item, I have to return the item, plus the penalty if there was an oath sworn falsely about it, et cetera, because holding on to the item is still considered a transgression. And so this is the question of what links do you go to return the actual thing you took.
Is there no penalty for the theft itself?
I mean, apart from the returning of the item?
Yeah.
So there's penalties like flogging and additional castigation, not castration, castigation. But in terms of additional financial penalties, no. So that, yes, you might think that's a little low, but that's because, to be perfectly honest, in Western European law system, we've always had a very strict attitude towards theft. And it was not until the 20th century that the final levels of capital punishment that were used for theft were abolished. And the idea of executing someone for stealing something has been an anathema to Judaism since 3,000 years ago. And Western civilization caught up to that in the 1900s. So we have a tendency to really want to punish thieves in the West. And it's a whole long sociological discussion of whether or not that fixation on property rights is part of the reasons why we developed individualistic democracy. But that's another story. The fact is, in Judaism, we don't like theft, but we also don't go nuts over what happens.
Well, it also is logical. If, for example, you stole my phone, I want my phone back. If you do 20 years in jail but I don't have the phone, that doesn't help me at all.
Right. Exactly. It not literally doesn't help me at all.
Literally.
Exactly. All right. And even so far as to return, we go to part 3.
If his fellow, the fellow that he robbed, had died, he must return it to his heirs.
Right. Just because the person you stole from is dead doesn't get you off the hook. Because if you stole it from him and he dies, who should it have gone to? His heirs. Right? If I deprive you of something, I am literally depriving your children of the same thing if you die. Therefore, they have a claim that needs to be met by me returning it and the value in more complicated circumstances. Okay. Mishnah 6.
Am I reading from the top of the page, point 1?
Yes, right at the very, very top.
If he had repaid the value, but had not paid the added fifth, or if he had forgiven him the value, but not the added fifth, or if he had forgiven him both, except for less than a peruta's worth of value, he need not go after him.
Okay, so let's pull this apart. It's nice, typical Mishnah logic style, which means it's confusing. But it's actually clear, right? If you had repaid the value, that is to say, let's just use simple numbers. Let's imagine I stole $100, right? So I owe this person the $100 plus a fifth, plus the 20, right? 20, right? So if I have paid the value, I gave him back his 100, but I haven't given him back the fifth, the penalty on top of that, I don't have to chase him down in Persia. I have to send it to him. I have to give it to him, but I don't have to go to the ends of the earth. Because the primary directive to return the item and that overpowering need to give it back to him, that is for the thing that was stolen, not for the penalty on top of the thing that was stolen. Similarly, if you have forgiven me the value of what I took, you say, you know what, don't worry about the $100, just give me the penalty for whatever reason. And I can't personally imagine a situation where that would happen, but the Mishnah is simply trying to make a point, so we don't need to imagine that situation. But you forgive the thing, but you still want the penalty, then I also don't have to chase you down all the way to Persia. I still have to pay you, but I don't have to chase you down to Persia. Why? Because I'm not giving you back the thing anymore. I'm only giving you back the penalty. Not because I've already paid it, but because you forgave me, and therefore I don't need to pay it. But I do have to pay the penalty. Or I have, or it's forgiven me from both, but there is less than a pruta's worth, right? So you forgave me the $119.999999. There's still a little bit left that I owe you. I don't have to chase you down because it's less than that 1 penny's worth of money. Make sense? Okay, and if that makes sense, then let's flip it, and then we'll see the obverse as the classic term.
So point 2. If he had repaid him the added fifth, but not the value.
So I paid the penalty, but not the principal.
Or if he had forgiven him the added fifth, but not the value.
He forgave the penalty, but he didn't forgive the principal, which is a more likely situation.
Right. Or if he had forgiven both, except for peruta's worth of the value, he must go after him.
Right? I forgave you all of it except for a penny, but there's still a penny left. In all these cases, you're paying me. And not only are you paying me, you're chasing me down to pay me. Unknown call, that goes off. And That needs to be turned off. Okay. How are we doing on that? Make sense? So it's really just trying to underscore the idea that the return of the stolen property is a primary obligation, one that should be or must be fulfilled with all due effort by the person who stole it or the court's representative to the person who it was taken from or their heirs.
Yeah, but in this case,
Which case is this case?
sorry, yes, in the second one, he forgave him the fifth, but did not forgive him the principal. He returned the main part.
No,
No.
that's in this particular case, this is like a different set of cases,
He didn't return anything.
right? So what's hard to see here is that there's like 6 different cases,
Correct. In the fifth case.
right? So in the 5th case, that would be he forgave the 5th, but didn't forgive the principal.
Correct. He returned already the principal.
No.
No.
No, it'd be like this. Imagine you stole $100 from me, and I tell you, look, don't worry about the 5th that you owe me, but I want the $100 back. That's the case.
Okay.
So I still want the thing that was taken. I'm just willing to forgive the penalty that goes on top of it. Because maybe that'll make it easier for you to get it back to me. Maybe I understand it was an honest mistake-ish. For whatever reason, I'm being kind and I'm forgiving that extra 5th. But I still want the thing that was taken. Then you got to track me down. So it's good not to steal, which is the short of it. All right. Now we get back to a little bit more of this complicated issue of when you've sworn and not sworn, and when people come and give testimony. So we'll work on Mishnah 7.
Point 1 is, if he had paid him the value and had sworn falsely to him concerning the added 5th, he must pay a 5th on the 5th, and so on, until the value of the added 5th becomes less than a peruta's worth.
All right. So this is like, just, dude,
Yeah.
go ahead and admit it. So he's like, all right, yeah. I stole you the 100. Here's your 100. And the guy says, good, but also you have to pay me the 5th. You go, well, I paid you the 5th yesterday. Like, no, you didn't. You go, I swear I paid the 5th yesterday. And witnesses come and say, no, you didn't pay the 5th yesterday. And it's like, all right, you're right. I didn't pay the 5th yesterday. So here is now the principle of that plus a penalty of a 5th on the 5th that I was lying about. But I paid that yesterday. Like, no, you didn't. Every time you lie, you have to pay the original 5th that you were lying about, plus a new penalty of a 5th of that 5th.
But the 5th keeps getting
The
smaller.
5th keeps getting, it's a 5th of 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 a 5th. And eventually, the 5th becomes less than a pruta, and then we just say, all right, fine, we're done. And obviously, we would assume that nobody would actually get to that point. But sometimes it does feel that way. You'll see some people who will, put off their credit card bill. I'll pay it next month, I'll pay it next month, I'll pay it next month. And that happens in the opposite direction where it keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But I'm not asking for confession. But that's kind of the same issue where you would think it just makes more sense to take care of it now. But sometimes there are reasons why someone might try to avoid doing it now and think they can do better later. And unfortunately, it just keeps adding up.
And then in America, you declare bankruptcy and you don't have to pay anything.
Yeah, bankruptcy is not what it used to be, but
No.
yeah, it's a little stricter than it used to be.
Oh, that's interesting. I know that. He comes to ask us for money, and I can see he's going to be in bankruptcy.
Right.
I didn't realize hey.
Yeah, it's more complicated than our conversation tonight.
Oh, yeah.
All right, part 2.
Part 2, so too with a deposit. As it says in Leviticus, in a matter of deposit or a pledge, or through robbery, or by defrauding his fellow, or by finding something lost and lying about it, such a one must pay the value and the added 5th and bring a guilt offering.
Okay, so what the Mishnah is trying to bring to our attention, which the Torah already did, is that this isn't just about stealing from people. This could be about other forms where you were lying about something of value and then caught in that lie after you had sworn by God that you had not actually taken it. So it can be for theft, it can be for a deposit, it can be for a pledge, it can be for, defrauding somebody in a business deal, or it could be finding something and saying, I didn't find your phone, and I swear to God, I never found your phone. And then you're like, well, what's that in your pocket? Oh, that's your phone. That in all those cases, even though they're not theft, you still have the same rule, which is you return it and you pay the fifth, and we also have the offering.
Can you explain the deposit concept? I don't understand that.
Oh, sure. A deposit concept is quite simple. Imagine I'm going to buy fruit from you tomorrow for my store, and I give you $100 today, and then I come tomorrow and I'm going to give you the rest. And you say, well, you didn't give me the 100 yesterday. What? that would be the same kind of thing. And deposit can also mean, depending upon the circumstance, I give you something to hold on for me, and I say, please look after my fruit, and then I come back tomorrow and the fruit's gone, and you look really happy and full, and you say, I swear I never ate your fruit. That's the same kind of problem. Okay, so we actually find out exactly that case in the next section.
And a guilt offering.
And a guilt offering, of course, because by not vowing, but by swearing, taking an oath by God that you didn't take the thing that you were actually taking, you have not only broken the commandment of not stealing, you have dragged God front and center into this, and therefore you have an additional crime against God that needs to be atoned for. God didn't ask to be drawn into this conspiracy. Why are you making him an accessory to your theft? And therefore a guilt offering goes on top of this.
What could it be a guilt offering? What could it be a guilt offering?
Well, it was scalable depending upon the means of the person. So a cow, a sheep, goat, dove, that kind of thing.
I guess it depends on.
It depends on what you can
I
afford,
thought
right?
it meant about money because of the
No, this is a sacrifice. Yeah, this is at the altar. Okay, so
We're at point 3 now.
we're up to point 3.
If a man said, where is my deposit? And the other said, it is lost. If the one says, I adjure thee.
Right, that means I command that you will swear in order to be clear of this crime.
And the other one says, amen.
Meaning, okay, yeah, I swear, I didn't touch anything. Right, adjure is one of those great English words that we don't get to use enough.
No.
Right, adjure means to force someone to take an oath.
Oh.
So, for example, in an American court, you will be adjured by the bailiff before you give testimony. I know, isn't that a great word? So that's what it means. In Hebrew, it's much simpler. It's the same word as oath, but in a causative form, the he feel. I make you take an oath. So
he swore that it was lost.
Right.
And witnesses testify against him that he consumed it.
Dun, dun, dun.
He need only pay the value. But if he confessed it of himself, he must repay the value and the added fifth and bring a guilt offering.
All right. So this I know is going to blow a few minds. I know this is going to. Okay. So here's the problem. Or maybe not problem. Here's what's going on. Imagine, we'll go back to my my fruit example, right? So I tell you, I did not touch your fruit. And 2 people show up, and I'm willing to swear before God that I did not touch your fruit. It's just, it was gone. It was lost. A flood came, it took it away. 2 witnesses show up, and they check out as being reliable and by all normal measures. And the 2 witnesses says, we saw Rabbi Neely eating your fruit. We saw him just totally, scoff the whole pile down. And I say, no, I didn't. No, I didn't. And they say, yes, 2 witnesses. Right? So the court has to believe their testimony because we have 2 witnesses, like I said, who have been examined and checked to make sure that they are, honest witnesses and are not likely to be lying and were in the right place and could have known that. All the things necessary to accept their testimony, but I still profess my innocence. If I'm still claiming to be innocent, the way the Torah was written, the way this passage was written, I am now going to be convicted of theft, but I'm not convicted of having violated an oath.
Because you didn't do the oath yet.
No, I did the oath. No, I did the oath. That was the amen.
Here in the Hebrew,
right?
It says mashbiachani.
Right.
I force you to
exactly.
swear. But then the other guy says, amen.
which means he agrees.
He agrees, but he didn't do it yet.
No, that's the shorthand for he swears. Yeah, that's the Mishnah saving. That's the way the Mishnah saves ink. It uses these abbreviations. So it means that yes, I agree, I swear, and I didn't touch it. Because the court cannot follow because the Torah talks about a person who swears and then confesses his guilt, because I have not confessed my guilt, my penalty is less. Now, I know that you're all going, but that doesn't seem right, right? A confession is good for the soul. We want people to confess. We should make the penalty less for somebody who confesses than for someone who doesn't. And certainly that's the way it normally works in American law. However, in this, as we've talked about many times, the court is reluctant to put additional penalties upon a person that do not conform precisely to what the Torah has laid out as the conditions for those penalties. And one of the conditions the Torah laid out for those penalties is that the person confesses that they did it. So we may think from a practical point of view that this is encouraging people not to confess, but from a Torah point of view, this is the only ruling that will actually match what the Torah has described, which is when you confess, you add the fifth.
Well, if you confess, then I know for sure you really did it. So now you get the full penalty. But if you keep saying that, even though the witness is saying it, well, maybe you didn't really do it. I mean, I want to penalize you. I won't put that additional penalty because maybe somehow slight chance you didn't really do it.
All right, which is exactly my point, which is that if we don't have the precise conditions that meet the precise language of the Torah, then we cannot implement the penalty that the Torah describes. Even if we feel it would be better, because doing justice isn't about what I feel is right. It's about actually matching what God told me was right, which isn't always easy, but we certainly know that if you don't meet one of the main conditions, the confession, then you don't actually have that problem. Similarly, if the person confesses and pays it back without having sworn, and they just simply pay back the value with no added fifth. So there's lots of ways for thieves to get out of this with a lesser penalty. And that, as I've said before, that shouldn't bother us. Right? The purpose of the Torah isn't to penalize somebody to the fullest extent of the law. The purpose of the Torah is to help us understand what God wants of us when we implement the law. And that means sometimes we get perhaps more than we expect, and sometimes we get less than we expect. But if we are hewing to the Torah, then hopefully the net benefit to the society is better than it would be if we just did what we wanted. The whole tension, the plot of the entire Tanakh, from the phrasing over and over again is, if you do what is right in your own eyes, things don't work out so well. If you do what is right in the eyes of God, things tend to work out a lot better. And even in matters where it means we are being more lenient on someone who by testimony seems to have been a criminal, he doesn't meet all the conditions, we don't give the greater penalty. Even though you might then say we're encouraging people not to admit their guilt. Well, blame the author.
So in the eyes of God, that person, preferably someone will return the things without saying that he was guilty, so without admitting anything.
No, in the eyes of God, he wouldn't have stolen in the first place. In the eyes of God, once he was caught, he would have returned it without needing to swear that he didn't. And in the eyes of God, he is still guilty for having sworn against God, and he will face a punishment that God will deliver. And that punishment is always going to be worse than a fifth of value.
But if he really wants forgiveness from God too, he'll bring the sacrifice to God, because that's who you're asking.
And the fifth, right? So once the person 5 years down the road goes, you know what, it's been weighing on my heart that I swore against God for this, I'm going to bring the sacrifice, and I'll bring the fifth 5 years later, because there's no expiration on this, to clear myself for what I did. And so that is between the person and God. And for us, that may not seem that important, which is a shame, but the Mishnah and the Torah seem to consider that to be important enough that people would still do it. And if you want to know about, where people are willing to do what is needed of them, even if there isn't a legal requirement in the sense that the court isn't going to come and beat you. Most people that I know, no matter how irreligious they are in many other respects, are still going to eat matzah for Pesach. They're still going to do Brit Milah for their children. right? Why? Because they have a deep connection to the sense, the most absolutely.
Yeah, well, I know people that are not, but yes.
Of course, there are some exceptions. There are some thieves, right? if everybody was perfect, we wouldn't have needed Torah. If everybody is perfect, we wouldn't have needed the world. So, the world is a vehicle for the perfection of human souls, not for the opposite. But that means that the majority of people do have a conscience, and the majority of people do seek a connection that often will have them do things that aren't in their own material self-interest, because they know that spiritually, psychologically, emotionally, it's more important to them. And that is something that we shouldn't scoff at. It makes a big difference for a huge number of people. I'd say the majority of people in the world, that their conscience, their sense of right and wrong does come into play. Now, we're really good as being humans of self-rationalization and justifying to ourselves and clearing our own conscience without really enough effort. But we have to do that work. We don't usually just say, oh, it's okay if I steal $10,000 from this cash register, because why not? We'll come up with a good lie to ourselves of why we would do it. And sometimes those lies will eventually fall, and then we will want to fix what we have done. And that's the situation that we're talking about here.
It sort of leads me to think about Yom Kippur. I mean, we've done that. They're not stealing $10,000.
No, God forbid.
Right, God forbid. But throughout the year, you know that there are things that are wrong, and you're trying to make amends with Hashem. You're not trying to make amends for Yom Kippur. You're supposed to go to people and say, if I did anything wrong, right? But we're also doing that. There is a spiritual thing that's in Yom Kippur that sort of echoes what this is.
Right.
You bring a sacrifice because you know you've done something wrong against heaven, and so you want to fix that too, the way you want to fast on Yom Kippur and hope that gets you through it.
And even against other people. I think the majority of people, they may not always know the way. They may not always feel they have the courage to go and apologize. But the majority of people, when they've done something that they cannot excuse as being, well, it was okay, it wasn't such a big deal, but they know they did something wrong, they want to fix it.
Yes.
They just often don't know how. And they will have those feelings. And unfortunately, they don't look into the fact that doing it, there is a way to do it that isn't going to end your life or make everybody hate you. And in fact, it will fix your life. Because after all, everybody in this community believes this guy's a thief who's just refusing to confess. And there's a social cost that comes along with that that shouldn't be undervalued. Yes?
Quick question, what happens to the sacrifice? Do they burn it to a crisp?
Yes. Yeah. Or depends on the different types of sacrifices. It's either burnt up all the way or it's given to the priests, the extra. But you don't get to eat it.
Okay, I was thinking maybe going to the poor, but the priest.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I was going to say the priests are a variety of poor in the classical agricultural model. They are alienated from the means of production. Chapter 9, Mishnah 8.
Point 1 is, if a man said, where is my deposit?
This should sound familiar.
And the other said, it is stolen. If the one says, I adjure thee, and the other says, amen, and witnesses testify against him that he stole it, he must make twofold restitution.
Right? Because remember, straight up theft, there is a twofold restitution, unless it's a sheep or a lamb and all those other things. But for standard theft, there is a twofold penalty.
Confess as well?
He did not confess, but the witnesses testify against him, which makes him legally, and we believe the witnesses to be true, so we hope that we're doing the best we can for justice, but legally he is now labeled as a thief. And therefore he faces the thief's penalty. On the other hand, if he confesses...
If he confessed it of himself, he must repay the value and the added fifth and bring a guilt offering.
So for those of you who wanted him to do the right thing, here, he's doing the right thing, and the victim gets less. Right? If he does the right thing, if he confesses, then he gets the value plus a fifth rather than a value plus the value, rather than twofold. So again, the Torah is not interested in satisfying the feelings of retribution. It is interested in actually implementing what rules God has given us. And sometimes that's going to make us feel that people are getting off the hook or not. But if we tailor our feelings to match the Torah's outcomes, it might help us overcome some of those feelings, which is why even though we can't implement these laws within our own society because we obey the laws of American society, how we view people who are suspected of property theft or of petty theft among friends or colleagues at work and such, keeping these sorts of things in mind can be very, very helpful, right? If someone says, I swear I didn't take the hole punch from the office, that should be treated differently than someone who says, I didn't take it. Right? If they're willing to go to the point of swearing, that should make us feel differently about them. And if we find out later that there are witnesses that they did, how we deal with it should depend upon whether they confess or not confess. And that should be part of our feelings. And if someone shows up and says, you know what, I took this hole punch, here it is, then, well, depending upon whether they're Jewish or not, they would be then obligated for an additional fifth, and that would help them clear themselves of that feeling of guilt. If they're not Jewish, we can't hold them to this part of the law because they're going to say, excuse me? Okay, ready for Mishnah 9? Now we get into another form of theft, which is going to make it a little bit more wrinkly.
If a man stole from his father and swore falsely to him, and the father died, he must repay the value and the added fifth to the father's sons or brothers.
Okay. Complicated case. I steal from my dad. Right? I steal his gold watch. All right, let's leave it as money. It's easier. I steal $1,000 from my dad, and before I can return it or be caught or anything else, dad dies. Who inherits from my father? Me, right? And my brothers, right? So you might think, well, just subtract the $1,000 from whatever your inheritance was supposed to be, and we'll call it good, right? But according to the Torah, I cannot hold on to that which I have stolen. So even though the $1,000 is technically at least $333 of it and 33 cents mine, I have to give the whole $1,000 back to the estate and be divided among the other heirs. Because, I mean, technically a portion of that was mine now that the guy's dead, but I'm not allowed to hold on to any portion of it. It has to go back. And with the added fifth, back into the estate to be distributed to the other heirs. Yeah, go back to the estate and then to the other heirs. That way, I am no longer in possession of that which was taken. Even though by having stolen at the wrong time, meaning between the theft and the return, my father died, I'm ending up with considerably less than if I had stolen it before he died and given it back before he died. Because I would have been out the fifth, but I would have still gotten the third back to me when he died as part of my regular inheritance. Does everyone follow that?
Yeah.
Right, so I was unlucky that I stole when I stole. It's not unlucky, of course, you chose to be a thief, but the timing worked out doubly disadvantageous to me. And that, again, goes back to that idea that you're not allowed to hold on to that which was taken. So, sorry, you shouldn't have stolen. However,
if he will not repay, or if he does not have with which to repay, he must borrow, and the creditors come and are repaid.
All right, so the will not repay, we're going to have to leave as sort of a little bit of vague because the commentaries are very open on this, and the halacha gets more complicated about what exactly constitutes a won't pay, but the can't pay is a little bit more understandable. A can't pay means if he gives back that, because that is a portion of his inheritance, and he would need that to survive now that his father is no longer supporting him. And we might easily imagine that somebody who is stealing from their father might exactly be the kind of person who needs extra money and is therefore not going to be able to live if he gives back the entire inheritance he was supposed to receive that he had stolen prematurely. His life is over, but we can't let him keep it. So what do? What we do is we let him borrow from other creditors the amount that he stole. And then he returns what he stole to the estate, and the creditors collect the amount that he borrowed from them from the estate. It's money laundering.
Oh,
Right.
What's about the fifth? What's about the fifth?
The fifth goes to the estate. Yeah, the fifth goes into the estate.
But
right?
then the estate has to give it right back
To the
to
creditors.
so they don't get it anyway.
Correct. Right. So the brothers don't get a bonus. But remember, if he hadn't stolen, they weren't going to get that money anyway. That was his portion that only got messed up because of his untimely theft or the untimely death. But what the Mishnah is worried about here is that he might think because he doesn't want to see footnotes in Talmud and Halacha, or because he can't give it back, that he won't give it back. And if he won't give it back and can't give it back, then he's going to be carrying this burden of sin. And that's a big problem. So instead, we find a way to meet him halfway, which is to say, yes, a large portion of what it is you're supposed to give back should technically be yours because you inherit from your father. We're going to talk about disowning your son in just a minute, which might be on your mind after this kind of behavior. Technically, you would have deserved this anyway, so we're going to find a way to help you get it out of your hands, but also not completely bankrupt you.
But that assumes that he stole the amount which he would have been entitled to inherit anyway. My guess is if he's stealing way more than he would have inherited.
Well, we can't assume one way or the other.
But if he did, I mean, if he stole half his father's wealth, it was supposed to be divided among 5 people. Even if he gets it from the creditor,
well, then, yeah.
And then they have to give it all back to the creditor.
Well, he would give back everything, and he would borrow the portion that he is allowed to keep. Right. So I'm not good at math.
Yeah.
You always make me do math. So in the example that you used, he would give back the half the father's wealth that he took,
Right.
and he would get 1/6 or 1/5 from his brother from the estate. The 1/5 value is
But
what he
the
would be
estate-
borrowing.
That half that went back to the estate,
Right.
you just said the estate has to repay the creditor,
Only for the amount that I've borrowed from the creditor,
which is
only
half the estate.
which is only equal to that which I get to keep.
So the estate loses.
No.
It's $1 million estate. It should have been divided among 10 kids. He
Okay.
stole $500,000.
Okay.
Okay, he's got it. He goes to a creditor
Right.
and he borrows.
No.
That's
No.
not half
He
a million.
borrows 100,000.
Just
the part that is his due.
Just his due.
Right.
So they're all out.
And he returns
That just
the
that part.
500,000 plus the 5th penalty, and then he is able to keep the 100,000 that was his due,
Okay.
minus whatever else he's had to pay, and so it might be
Assuming
less than
he still
100,000
has-
now.
Right, assuming he still has that to repay.
Well, it's definitely the 5th is going to be less than his
The
100,000. I mean, I guess he would have to have stolen like 90 more percent of his father's wealth. I mean, the math can get complicated. I'm not going to put a spreadsheet up,
He stole
but
everything. By the time they figure it out, he has spent it anyway. There's no money left. Which is probably what would have happened.
Yeah.
well, it depends. I mean, we're dealing with theft, death, and then
Yeah.
repayment. So,
So the creditors only pay him his part.
right?
Not everything that
Not
he
everything
stole.
he stole.
No.
Only his part.
Right.
Ah.
So in this way, the brothers or siblings, they lose money.
Yes.
No.
No,
Yes.
because one second.
Okay.
If I continue his line, okay, of thought, okay, if he's still over his part, okay,
Right.
like if his part is, let's say there are 10 siblings,
Right.
he's still 40% of
Right.
the money,
Good.
and the creditors only return 10%, the estate is losing 30%.
No.
Yes.
No.
He doesn't. No, he spent
No,
it.
because
Okay,
he
hold
doesn't
on.
have the money.
He spent it.
He doesn't
Oh,
have
so
the
you,
money.
right. So if you're assuming that he no longer has the
Right.
money at all,
Correct.
then he is sold as a slave, and that is used to pay the estate.
Ah, okay.
Okay.
That
That's
money,
justice.
they pay the
That's
30% of the
Right.
city.
So if you're ever in a case where the thief cannot pay the penalty, right, because the money's gone,
Mhm.
and there's no way for him to pay it, and there's no forgiveness forthcoming, then he is sold, and that money goes to the victim, and that's it.
Okay, that was,
There.
Okay.
that was the issue.
That's where I was going.
Okay.
Thank you. Yes.
But in a case where the money is available, but it's only just enough to keep him alive, and since he already has a claim to it as the inheritor, he still has to take care of the transgression. And so this is a way to allow him to keep the value without keeping the stolen property.
So the court also decide how much is the minimum necessary he need in order to keep alive. So
Oh,
that, how much they need to return, but
Right.
they don't want that they will be hungry.
Right. So if
the
he
court
says,
decide how much really he can push.
Yes, right. So I mean, if he says, "Look, I need $500,000 because otherwise I can't go grocery shopping," they laugh and say, "No, no, 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 no." But if he needs $1,000 or else he's going to lose his house, lose his car, lose his job, lose his food, then the court says, "Okay, fine, but we need to find a way to get the $1,000 stolen out of your hands and back to the family so that you're not a thief anymore, and we'll make sure you still get the $1,000 of value through this exchange or borrowing and all of that."
It's like what we said before, it's going bankruptcy.
Right.
So they decide how much you need in order to survive, and the rest of the money goes to the state.
Exactly, exactly. Like I said, another way of looking at it is it's like money laundering, but for a good reason, right? Because the reason they're putting this in is to encourage the person to give up that which they've taken, right? Because otherwise he'd say, "No, no, I need it," and you got to pry it out of his fingers. And that's not the best way to do it. The best way to do it is to say, "Look, because you are the beneficiary of the thing that you stole, technically you have a claim." Now, we don't do this for other people, right? Because if I steal from you and you die, I can't come to your estate and say, "Well, let's split it." No, it belongs to your estate. But when I'm your son, I was stealing from myself, and technically I should be allowed to keep my part that I was stealing. I can't keep my brother's part, but I should be able to keep my part. But the Torah doesn't want me holding on to the stolen property, so this is a way of resolving that. It's complicated, I know, but life is.
Life is, yes.
Yes.
And those are realistic situations that you're talking about.
Unfortunately, yes.
Yes.
Yes. We're on Mishnah 10.
Yep. If a man said to his son, "Kunam,"
Right, which is a way of a shorthand for making an oath, taking a vow that you are going to like make the following statement a binding sentence, not just how I feel at the moment.
"You will not derive any benefit from that which is mine." And then he died, the son may inherit him.
All right, words matter. So if imagine somebody says, "I swear by the temple altar that you will not derive anything from any of my property." Okay, while I'm alive, that vow is in effect. And therefore you are not allowed to eat of my food. You're not allowed to, sit in the shade of my tree. Nothing is allowed to be. But when I die, well, look at how it was phrased, right?
Who made? Ben or
No, the person who made the vow.
so the son.
No, the father. In this case, it's the father.
Yeah.
Right, the father dies. Well, the father's vow sounded like it was when he was alive, because it's when it was his property. But once he dies, the property is distributed, and now the son can inherit. So even though you might have thought you're not allowed to benefit from what is mine, you might think that meant he was disinherited. No, the father did not specify that clearly enough. However, if he's a little bit clearer.
But if he also said, "both during my life and at my death," then when he dies, the son may not inherit from him and must restore what he received from his father's inheritance to the father's sons or brothers.
Right. So again, this is like for some reason it was a mistake, but then witnesses came out and said, no, the father made a vow that he would never be able to benefit both alive or dead. Then he has to give it back, because now it's kind of like stolen property. Not the 1/5 issue, because he didn't deliberately steal it, but it is something he's not allowed to hold on to. However, he is allowed to hold on to the value of the property once it's been transferred, which is what part 3 tells us.
If he has nothing, he takes out a loan and the creditors come and exact payment.
Sounds familiar? Right? So this is a similar case, which is why even though it isn't about theft, it is covered by this particular chapter of Mishnah. So you say, all right, Dad did disown me, but I'm going to starve to death if I don't have this inheritance. So have the money back that I got, but use it to pay off the loan that I just took out for the value of the money I got.
Now, what happens if the siblings say, you know what, we don't care about that, say to you, we think that you should receive the equal part. can they disobey the dad, the will of the dad?
They can't do that directly. That is to say, they can't say the estate.
cannot say.
They can't say the estate gives it to you.
Right.
But what they can do is say, we've got our money, here, have your third from our money. Because from their money, they can give it to whoever they like, or to whomever they like,
Whoever, that's right.
but not from the state.
but not from the estate.
Not directly.
But they
Indirectly.
inherit the state. They become to be the state, so they can't decide.
No. Estate is the legal term for just the temporary people who are in charge of the property as it's being distributed. Once it's been distributed, it's no longer the estate. It's now the property of son A, the property of son B, the property of son C, or nobody likes son C. Son C got nothing. But if son A and B decide that they like son C, they can each chip in and give him what would be the fair share. Or not, because people are people. And the Beit Din can help if son C already has gotten the share and he needs it to live, they can help him keep the value without holding on to that which was vowed should not be in his hands. Because the creditors are allowed to collect. Because they are not the son who are benefiting from it.
Oh.
This is such an indirect benefit that it's considered permissible.
That's-
Yeah. Scratching the left ear with the
Yes.
right hand.
Right.
But sometimes your ear itches and you got to. All right. We are on, I think we can shoot through this. It's not too complicated. Mishnah 11.
11.1. If a man stole from a convert and swore falsely to him, and the convert died,
All right. What's the problem?
is a convert.
Right. Why is that a new issue?
I thought we're supposed to.
Up. He has no heirs. Right? The convert has no heirs. We're dealing specifically in a case where the convert has no heirs. Right? If the convert has children, then that's not an issue. If we're dealing here with a case where a convert has no heirs. Now, why is it only a convert that might have no heirs? Everyone else has a family.
They do, either brothers and sisters, they do have.
Brothers,
they have the
sisters,
heirs.
aunts, uncles, grandfather,
Right.
second cousin,
Not
you know.
necessarily children.
Exactly. You can go up the tree and out the tree and down the tree. You will eventually find somebody related to somebody. But especially in the ancient world, where when people who converted gave up their entire pagan family, no heirs. They were a new line in the people of Israel, and there's no way to go back up that line to find someone else to give it to. And so the question becomes, who gets what the thief owes? Because we're not going to let the thief keep it. So it's got to go somewhere. And
So if the convert died, he has to repay the value and the added fifth to the priests, the Kohanim, and the guilt offering to the altar, because it says.
and
in
this is the
Numbers,
quote that actually gives us proof for this.
If the man has no kinsman to whom restitution can be made.
All right, pause real quick. That verse in Bamidbar, does it say convert?
No, it does not.
It does not. And this is one of those great examples where the rabbis read the Torah and they understand the Torah is expecting you to use your brain. Because it says, if a man has no kinsman, who could have no kinsman? Somebody, right? I didn't come like out of the dirt, right? I didn't fall off a tree. So the only people who could have no kinsman legally, that is to say by legal connection,
Right.
would be someone who converted. That would be the only person, and someone who converted and didn't have children. So therefore, this case in Bamidbar must be talking about those who convert without having children.
Right.
It makes sense, but you wouldn't know it by just reading through the Torah, without stopping. Because if the guy has no kinsman, and you would think, oh, that's fine. Not, wait a minute, who has no kinsman? Everybody's related to somebody.
You know what? I will do different. I disagree.
You would do differently. Hashem,
I'm sorry. I
No, no.
came too late. Okay? I came 2,500 years late. Okay, but
This doesn't seem appropriate
no.
in our day and age, is what you're saying. Because what's the issue?
No, because they say that they need to return to the Kohanim, okay?
Right.
But I think in a different way. My thought, in my line of thought, is the following, okay? They don't have any kinsman because they become to be part of the Jewish people.
Right.
So if they become to be part of the Jewish people, okay, the Beit Din should receive the money
Right.
and allocate to the community. not to the Kohanim or to the community, because the Am Israel become to be part of the family of him.
Right.
So that's why I
So,
Kohanim
right,
not,
which is a beautiful sentiment and one which is discussed among the commentators. But the answer that is given of why it is given to the Kohanim rather than given to other members of the community is because who is the true father of the convert? God. And who are God's other children that get the first dibs, that are the firstborn, if you will, of his family, the Kohanim. So it is going up the tree. It's going up the tree to God, and then back down to the Kohanim.
I don't want to apply Marxist. Okay, answers for that. Okay,
Well, remember, we already established that the Kohanim.
The Kohanim are being supported by the community also because they have no land on their own. So if you give them some money and some that they can get food or they can support themselves, it's like helping the community who doesn't have to give the Kohanim extra.
Or you could give to the Beit Din, and they know who needs the poor people and
That's not
and
fair. It
all
should be
this
distributed
stuff.
equally among all million Jews.
But hold on, wait. No, or even given to the poor. Hold on.
Local community,
Hold
because
on.
they come to be his family.
So there is a tendency that I've seen in many conversations about Jewish law and right and wrong, and it's a nice tendency that people think that if there's extra money, that it should always go to the poor. And I like the feeling behind it, but it's not always appropriate, right? The poor are not always first in line for every found money. The money has to go where it is supposed to go. And sometimes that means
To schools, okay?
well, but sometimes it means the money is going to go to a rich man. Sometimes it means the money is going to go to a bad person. Right? Why should I have to give the money to my father's brother's son, who's a complete lout? Why should I have to give him the money of my inheritance just because I made a mistake? Why? Because that's where the Torah says it goes. Even though you would use it better, even though you could give it to the school and say, look, don't give it to him. He's an alcoholic. He's terrible. Let me give it to the yeshiva instead. No, the money goes where the Torah tells us to go.
Yeah, but in this case, okay, it's not his money, it's the money of the convert that he doesn't have anyone else.
Right.
So who become to be his family? It's his community. That's why for me was going back to the community, and in the community can decide priority, okay, whom in the community need more help. Call this.
Why need?
Huh?
Why should it? If there are three brothers, and the money needs to be divided,
No, we are.
No, I know. But we're talking about inheritance, right? Even though it doesn't look like inheritance, we're talking about inheritance.
Okay.
And inheritance doesn't go by need. If there are three brothers, one of them is a millionaire, one of them is middle class, and one of them is very poor, and the father dies, and each of them would get $100,000, the court doesn't get to say, the poor guy, he deserves all of it. The court can't say that.
That's fine, but this is a different case.
No, same idea.
No, this is a case that there's not anyone, there's not rich or poor or anyone related with him. He's by himself.
Right.
He died, so there's no one can receive legally the money.
Right? No.
So-
But you're still saying that the court should decide the entire body of the Jewish people
Or community.
is the most
Local
deserving, or the local community is most deserving of this person's money. Why should the Beit Din get to decide that Shlomo the tailor deserves the money from Yankel the convert more than Matel the butcher?
Because by your logic, because he converted, okay, so the Father is God, and everyone are sons of God, so we're supposed to receive everyone.
So if you were going to divide it evenly, I could almost understand that. But if you're going to divide it evenly, then you have to divide it evenly among the entire Jewish people.
Then what?
The entire Jewish people.
Not picking
Right?
and
He is
choosing.
equally close to everyone, not just the people who share the same zip code.
So they're doing it basically by giving it to the Kohen.
Right.
Well, it's not them doing it. I mean, because of exactly these arguments is, I believe, why God told us in Bamidbar, we're not going to fight over who gets the convert stuff. Right? Because I don't want people saying, hey, somebody converted to Judaism, if he dies, I'm first in line. Oh man, he had kids. Oh, what a shame. We don't want that idea. And so God tries to head it off by saying, look, nobody gets it because he's mine. Right? This convert, he's my son. And I say that his goes to the Kohanim.
So why not do the Leviim also?
Because that's not what God said.
No, but the same logic, why Kohanim and why not Leviim?
You're right. And I don't know whether God has a specific answer for that, except for the fact that the Kohanim were usually more in need than the Leviim were, in terms of what they were getting. Remember, the first tithe, the biggest tithe, goes to the Leviim, and then from the Leviim, a portion goes to the Kohanim. So it makes sense for that reason, if we're talking about need, that the Kohanim would need more.
But you said that we cannot go by the needs.
But you're asking me for why did God pick one or the other, and I'm trying to say I don't know. But if I were going to assume of why God picked one or the other among this, which was meant to prevent everybody from jumping in to grab something from the Kohanim's, house when he dies, or from the convert's house when he dies, it might be that it was considered more helpful to the Kohanim, or it might be just if you give it to the Kohanim, people won't argue as much because the Kohanim have a certain status, and if you make it part of the Kohanim, then people are going to say, oh well, if it was Shlomo's, I would argue, but if it's the Kohanes, then I guess perhaps. Perhaps.
And you can hope that the Kohanim will.
All right, one last really weird circumstance, because why not?
So we're on point number 2 now.
Yes.
If he brought the money and the guilt offering and then died.
No, he's right at Jerusalem, and he's there. And this is back to our thief case, not the convert case,
Okay.
right? Or this is the guy who, stole from the convert and needs to bring it as well. Right? He brings it, and the guy dies. The thief dies.
The thief died. Then the money shall be given to his sons, and the guilt offering shall be left to pasture until it suffers a blemish, when it shall be sold, and its value falls to the temple treasury.
All right, so
Oh, you don't kill it.
well, you can't, because a sacrifice can't be offered posthumously.
Oh.
A sacrifice can only be offered after the death.
So,
Right. I said a sacrifice cannot be offered posthumously. If I want to bring a sacrifice for a guilt offering, I have to stand there with the animal and offer it as a sacrifice. It has to be a live animal, otherwise.
No, but if he dies first.
But if I die
I can't bring the sacrifice.
on my behalf, it doesn't work like that.
Right.
Right. So if I stole from the convert and I'm bringing this to the sacrifice and I'm doing the fifth and all of that, but the convert's dead and then I die, well, then the money goes to my kids and the animal is just left to pasture until it finally becomes no longer fit for a sacrifice. It develops a blemish. And then it's sold, and that money from the animal goes into the temple treasury. Good?
yes, a lot of manipulation for the Kohanim and the...
Oh, how often does this happen?
First the Kohanim receive the money,
Yeah.
now the temple treasure receive the money. Really?
You think this is happening like every week?
There's a lot of manipulation there.
Well, there's potential. But again, it's just highlighting that the Mishnah cares very deeply about who gets what. Not because it just likes these questions, but because it matters. It matters to people, and it matters to Torah of who we're allowed to take money from and who we're allowed to then give it to. And that is a major point of Jewish law, and one that should concern us every bit as much as what counts as kosher or what I'm doing on Shabbat or how pretty my etrog is. Understanding whose property is what and how I relate to it and how I deal with it when I find it, when I'm borrowing it, when I'm taking care of it, when there's an inheritance happening. That should be a Jewish question for us every bit as much as all the other ritual things that sometimes take more of our time. Good. All right.
Wow.
Is your
Yeah.